fun. Now, I thought that we've been visiting lots of wonderful places across the world. Mongolia. We've been visiting the mounds as we visited them last week. And actually, talking about the mounds that we looked at last week, we've got somebody who actually follows my YouTube channel in the States called Sonia, and she said, I actually agree with everything that you said about the mound building in North America being destroyed, or because I actually see it going on all around me in the United States. And she said that it's almost as if the museums have got the evidence, but they don't like people to know about the mounds of North America. And then a few days before that, I was doing the talk in Bridgend in the afternoon, as you know. And I've got a lady called Pat who does come from the United States. And she saw images of these mounds when she was in the United States not so many years ago. And she wanted to go and find them, and she couldn't find them. She looked through Ohio and Illinois. We got the Serpent Mound in Ohio that we looked at, what we mentioned last week. The great mound at Illinois, and I mentioned the ones at Wisconsin and so on. She couldn't find them, and that's somebody from the United States trying to find their own history and archaeology, and they couldn't find it. And but today we're going to look at that behind us. Not exactly. We're going to be looking at the tour for a big chunk of this today, but we are then before we actually get to the tour, we're going to actually look what's in the landscape, the hinterland down from the tour. Now, when I looked at Glastonbury and the archaeology, history, and so on of Glastonbury, I do it from a backdrop that I've been to Glastonbury quite a number of times. I've spoken to two of the key archaeologists that look at Glastonbury, and Nancy and a Charles Hollinrake. Interestingly enough, Nancy's from the States. And I have picked up lots of little tips about Glastonbury and the tour. And what I'd like to do today is very much in what we've been doing, a little bit of myth, a little bit of legend, and trying to let you guys maybe behold what you see and try to interpret it. So I have mentioned the tour a number of times, and I've mentioned that in 1540, in January 1540, and I think on my birthday, the 5th of January, not making this up, the abbot was actually hung from the tour itself. But only weeks earlier, he had had a big feast, a sumptuous feast, which included 500 guests, 18 courses. They had all their servants and retinue, and that was in the Abbey complex. So it sort of gives you an idea how big the Abbey was in regards to Glastonbury. It was a huge Abbey. And this abbot was hung because he was obviously abusing his power to have a feast of over 500 people. All the money's going into feeding the poor rather than giving it, feeding the rich rather than giving it to the poor. So that's the one thing that I would say. But it's not just an abbot that was hung. It's the history that's behind Glastonbury. Now, if any of you were with me last night, and I know Ellen's watched the video since, we mentioned about Cornwall and Devon and Somerset, and we mentioned about Somerset in particularly with the flooded landscape and so on. And when we think of Glastonbury tour, this was actually an island 2,000 years ago. And slowly but surely, the landscape has been reclaimed. But if you do look at one or two images of the Glastonbury landscape, it's extensively flooded because the floodplains around it. But the town itself has built up with the Abbey and all the rest of it. What we do find with Glastonbury, there's this backdrop of always thinking about King Arthur and Guinevere and so on in regards to Glastonbury. There's the Arthurian link massively associated with Glastonbury, and you then think of Tintagel, you think of Cadbury Castle, and then you come across people that believe that King Arthur is actually Welsh, or you get people who actually think that King Arthur is actually Cumbrian, or you think that King Arthur's from Colchester. I think the main thing about Glastonbury and why it's intriguing is that we've got some of the earliest evidence of post-Roman activity. So as Roman civilization's collapsing across Britain, we still get the same trading links with Glastonbury as we do with Dinas Powys, which I've mentioned time and time again. And we've got those trading links which are very similar when we look at Tintagel. So all of that stuff is linked. The archaeology tells us more about the myths and legends than the myths and legends tell us about the archaeology. What I'm talking about is that if you go looking for King Arthur, you're not going to find him. But if you go looking for the archaeology, you probably find King Arthur. So again, I wanted to do something very quirky today. Oh, site of King Arthur's tomb. King Arthur's tomb. Now, that's rather interesting because it sort of enshrines why people go to the shrines of Glastonbury to get a connection with this legendary figure, mythical figure. But the archaeology actually speaks a lot more than this sign. So the site of King Arthur's tomb in the year 1191, the bodies of King Arthur and his queen were said to have been found on the south side of the Lady Chapel. And all of this abbey is actually down from the Tor. So if you sort of go directly in front, you've got the abbey. You've got the abbey. So the body of King Arthur found in 1191. Strange that really, actually, because the original wooden abbey burnt down a few years before. And after they had rebuilt it, they didn't have much money. And suddenly they found the body of King Arthur. Oh, and Guinevere as well, his wife, on the south side of the Lady Chapel. So on the 19th of April, 1278, the great King Edward I and his wife, Queen Eleanor, Edward Longshanks, the destroyer of the Welsh and the Scottish, they visited a black marble tomb on the site, and that survived until 1539. So I sort of questioned that. The reason why I've sort of questioned that is because I've always wondered why Henry VIII would have gone to Glastonbury and destroyed the tomb of his ancestor, King Arthur. And I've always sort of wondered whether this was actually the site of where King Arthur was found. But then you talk about Joseph of Arimathea, and you talk about Jesus Christ visiting Glastonbury, and all these wonderful things, which we'll go on to. We've got lots of little bits of myths and legends today. And you have the springs. So you've got the white well and you've got the red well. So anyone that's suffered from the coronavirus and they need iron in their system, or they got anemia, go to Glastonbury and go to this red springs well and top your bottles up, and you'll be fine for the rest of the year. And then the reason that spring is directly linked, it's true. You can laugh at me, Ellen. Shut up. This tor behind us, this rock is actually made of Carboniferous limestone, is actually made of ironstone as well, as I'm sure some of you will know, and that's what gives the red color. So immediately when you look around Glastonbury, you get the myths and legends of King Arthur, you get the abbey, you get the monk, you get the tower, but actually some of the ancillary things like the water gives that really deep sense of mysticism to Glastonbury. It's a site that I do really cherish. So I've got some good memories there. So, oh, the floodplain. Whoa, bang, whoa. So I don't know if any of you have ever looked out on the coastline at Lantwick Major. More towards Nash, actually, Nash Point. If you look directly across, and it's a really nice summer's day, you can actually see Glastonbury Tor. And that Glastonbury Tor was like a beacon open to the sea. And slowly but surely the land has been reclaimed. But the land has only really started to be massively reclaimed at Glastonbury over the past few hundred years rather than the past 2,000 years. This is actually looking northwards, and this is the devastating floodplain which swallows up roads and houses and all sorts of things. And again, it adds to what we say about Glastonbury, Avalon, the Isle of Glastonbury, the Isle of Avalon. And it adds to that. I'm just going to say something a little bit silly. We get people who actually move to Barry who don't actually believe that Barry Island was once an island. But there's a point to be made there, because when you think of Glastonbury Tor as an island, it adds to that sort of myth and legend sense. You've also got the Isle of Athenry as well, associated with Alfred the Great. So you've got lots of these sort of hillocks across the landscape that the archaeology is very rich, and it speaks more for the archaeology than it actually speaks for myths and legends, if myths and legends are real or factual or fiction. But coming from an archaeological point of view, archaeology can be more interesting than myths and legends. And I know there was there was a television program that I know Keith mentioned, Bone Kickers, which he was a great fan of, that visited Glastonbury. And in many ways, the program fell down because it focused more on the myths and legends than it did actually on the archaeology, which when they did the archaeology on Bone Kickers, which was with Julie Graham and Hugh Bonneville Carter, that stuff was the really interesting stuff. And you probably agree with me on that, Keith, when there was the science. That's the first time we learned about strontium and all the rest.
Yeah.
That was really good stuff. But because it focused too much on the myths and legends, it sort of spoiled the series. But it was a series about archaeologists, bone kickers, and again, more of this massive flooding. So what I've got is I've got 4 little articles in front of me, which I'm going to jump in. I've got one that looks at it's headlined Glastonbury Abbey, the archaeological story. There's some really interesting things in that, so I use that today, and that's from Current Archaeology. And then there's another little article that sort of looks at a mixture between archaeology, early Christianity, Joseph of Arimathea, looking at the archaeological evidence and a plan. And then we go back in time and we go to another site, which I'm sure some of you may have actually visited, which is the Glastonbury Lake Village site. It's a bit of a shame, really, because there was a reconstructed Iron Age building at the Glastonbury Lake Village, and it was part of the Glastonbury tourist trail, and unfortunately that's no longer there. But there was a massive archaeological excavation in Glastonbury in 1892 under Arthur Bullied, and then you've got St. George Gray, who excavated there as well, and they found some wonderful wooden archaeological evidence. So we go back, and then we come back, we come forward again, and we look at King Arthur. So that's basically what I wanted to do today. So there it is, the Lady Chapel in its contemporary setting. Wonderful, massive, sort of really nice sets of remains. You can get an idea of this site, and you can think, well, there'd be a cloister area. You've got this huge long nave, you've got the chancel, you've got all these little chapels going off and all the rest of it. And you've got the wonderful kitchen building, which I've mentioned before. I'm not exactly sure whether people have been able to go into the museum recently associated with Glastonbury, because they've got a really nice Abbey museum. There's really some really nice things in it, actually. But in regards to the Lake Village, the Lake Village and the excavations there's a building called the Tribunal on the main high street of Glastonbury, and in that museum there's like a nice wooden cut canoe, an original canoe that they actually found at the site. It's over 1,000 years old, so that's great. They redated some of the stuff with the Lake Village. They used to think it was a little bit older, a little bit newer than its age, so they redated it using radiocarbon dating. Let's sort of have a little look at these ruins and sort of the landscape. Look at that wonderful, and the reconstruction there of the tomb of King Arthur. But I love these types of images, and just a little thing, just a little bit of a digression actually. One of the things that we've been doing with the Barry class is that we've actually got Victorian glass plates, and we look at these. We're going to get these glass plates copied soon, and they're going in the new Barry Cadoxton book. So we've got some original images of Barry that nobody's seen for over 120 odd years. And the reason why I mention that is I love images like this. This is actually from a glass slide, and it gives it paints this sense of myth and legend associated with the site. So let's go back to this, and I'm just going to go to my notes, my lovely little notes, and I'm going to look at this. So you've got the image in front of you. Glastonbury Abbey, the archaeological story. Some really interesting points here. Excavators were repeatedly drawn to Glastonbury Abbey. We're archaeological excavators. People have been excavating at Glastonbury since 1191. The archaeological monks, when they found the remains of King Arthur. But what's really fitting is what's happened in the 1900s, the last century. It's difficult saying that, isn't it? From 1975, we used to say the last century was the Victorian century. The last century, the 1900s. And the one thing about the excavations at this wonderful site in front of us, this great site in front of us, is that out of the 36 excavations that were undertaken then in the 1900s, none of the information made it into print. None of it. No, and that's a very important point. Some of it, somebody may have said, "Oh, you know, I found something," but when I say they never made it into print, full reports discussing what they find. So what they've been doing since 2016 with Reading University, they've been looking at all these 36 archaeological excavations. And they've been readdressing the problems of dates and readdressing the problems associated with King Arthur and Guinevere. And I know one of you, and I'm not going to embarrass you by mentioning who you are, but one of you is a massive fan of King Arthur. What I'm trying to do today is not dispel the legends and myths associated with King Arthur. What I'm trying to say is the archaeology is more interesting than the myths and legends associated with King Arthur, because that's the evidence. That's the evidence. So the site of Glastonbury Abbey in Somerset is inscribed with legends that are at the heart of English cultural identity. I would actually say British cultural identity, actually, if I want to get nationalistic. It is popularly regarded as the burial place of King Arthur. Others would disagree. Others would argue that King Arthur was buried at St. Peter's Church near Brunner. Or some actually say he was actually down in Colchester way, but I wouldn't be down in Colchester way. They say that Glastonbury, another thing that they do say about Glastonbury, which is quite a statement. It's not Canterbury, it's nowhere else, but Glastonbury is the cradle of English Christianity, British Christianity, where Joseph of Arimathea reputedly founded the earliest Christian church in Britain, well before the tiring of Christians or anything like that. So we're talking Joseph of Arimathea, the uncle, accordingly, of Jesus Christ himself, is actually said to have come over here and established an early Christian church at Glastonbury. These stories influenced how Glastonbury developed. They influenced its direction. The reason why they influenced its direction is because the buildings at Glastonbury were being constructed out of the money that the pilgrims were bringing, because they believed that this space was so holy. So it's a site of great pilgrimage. These stories influenced the architectural style and layout of the Abbey's medieval buildings, particularly the Lady Chapel, which was constructed on the site of the ancient church. Just as the history and legends of Glastonbury Abbey influenced national narratives, so did the attention of the archaeologists. The archaeologists were drawn to Glastonbury. That's the place they wanted to go to. That's the place that they would make their name. One thing I do know is that any archaeologist who touches the legend of King Arthur, their career is never to be destroyed. And you know, me and Keith, well, watched the series Bone Kickers, and one thing in that series of Bone Kickers that they got really, really right was that I know an archaeologist who worked locally, who excavated at Brinner, and he was the one who was excavating at the spot where King Arthur may have also been buried. I always say that there was more that there was more than one King Arthur. The King Arthur was a name given to lots of leaders in the post-Roman period. That's what I believe anyway. So he was likely buried at Brinner. And this archaeologist, Eric Talbot, he was a professor at Glasgow University. He had everything, and he excavated at Brinner. He lost his post at the university. His archaeological career was destroyed, and he never worked in archaeology again because he dared to work on a site associated with King Arthur. There was an archaeologist working who found a stone inscribed with the words ART. I think that's the Arthmail stone. I'm not sure. That there's a few stones which have that title. He was excavating at Tintagel in the 1990s, and his career was absolutely destroyed because of it. So you don't go looking for King Arthur. You go looking for the archaeology, and then King Arthur finds you. That's the best way to do it. So working at the remains of the abbey. So between 1904 and 1979, 36 summers of archaeological excavation were undertaken at Glastonbury Abbey, funded by the Society of Antiquaries of London. Somerset Archaeological Societies and Naturalistic Societies excavated there, and lots of other archaeologists. 36 archaeological excavations between 1904 and 1979. And there were 8 different directors of archaeology directing the archaeological work. And this is the thing. They touched the landscape of King Arthur, but they didn't publish their work. Now, that's a crime, because there's no point doing archaeology unless you're giving the information to people. You know, over the years, I've fallen into this trap myself. I've got a list of archaeological sites that I have discovered that I have let nobody know where they are. So when I want to make a discovery, I go and find it. But that's completely irresponsible. I've got no right to keep that history and archaeology from anyone. And I will be rectifying that over the next few years by putting all of that into print. That's wrong of me, because if I fell over next week and ended up in the hospital and dead, that information that I've got would be gone. You know, when I was a child, I would hear about an archaeologist. This is all really relevant to what we're doing today. I used to hear about this archaeologist in the Barry area, and it said that he had excavated on archaeological sites and kept the information in his head. All of the information where he kept the finds, he kept in his head. So when this guy died in 2014, all of his work just disappeared with him. And that is terrible, because I was told that he'd found so many of these wonderful objects throughout the Vale of Glamorgan, and all that information will never be known. If it is going to be known, it is probably under a tarmac road, and it's going to take a while to come to surface. So you've got to make sure that people are aware of the archaeology and make it clear. Some of the things, even though some of those archaeologists were going for the grave of King Arthur and looking for the mythical Holy Grail, whatever the Holy Grail is, whether it's a tree, whether it's a cup, whether it's a piece of wood, whatever the Holy Grail is, other people have then started working at Glastonbury and actually fallen in love with the Anglo-Saxon and pre-Anglo-Saxon archaeology at Glastonbury. And then the medieval monastic buildings and various other material culture that's actually there. So despite their various agendas, all the excavators of Glastonbury Abbey had one thing in common. They failed to analyze and publish the results of their excavations. So we're looking at, this is a sketch. This is an isometric annotated sketch of the Anglo-Saxon church excavations drawn on the spot and signed by Theodore Fife in 1927. So he's found the remains of an Anglo-Saxon church, and he may have he basically kept this in his notebooks and nobody knew about it. So what we've got, this is the thing. This is the important point of all that. Got that, Mike?
Yeah.
That's a nice little plan. The whole point of all this is the whole point of all this is that's Anglo-Saxon, and if he gave a little bit more detail, we would have worked out that directly underneath the Anglo-Saxon walls is the pre-Anglo-Saxon building. So the Anglo-Saxon period in Britain, sort of from about the 500, 600, 700s, is the Britons and King Arthur that are fighting against the Anglo-Saxons. But this is what's important. If he had come up and actually published his results in full and said, actually, I found Roman material and I found pre-Anglo-Saxon stuff, people could actually think, hang on a minute, stop. If the pre-Anglo-Saxon stuff is actually Christian, which it would have been, definitely, and if we could assume that this may have been a religious site, and then we're talking about that's in the period of King Arthur, and then it starts to make the myths and legends of King Arthur not myths and legends, but actually reality. Because a period, what we're finding now, the evidence at Glastonbury, is that you get material from the 400s, 500s, which is sort of that period of King Arthur and all those myths and legends. So the archaeology is actually telling us that there's something going on. Myths and legends don't tell us there's anything going on. But because the value of his archaeology wasn't really published and made public and everyone knew about it, people kept looking for King Arthur. People kept looking for that period directly after Roman rule collapsed, when in fact the evidence was already always there. So these are not myths and legends, they're actually facts. Not particularly of King Arthur and Guinevere, but facts of a period that occurred in the period of King Arthur in the 400s and the 500s. I'm stepping on very dangerous ground here because I don't want to sound as if I'm falling into the myths and legends traps that people fall into when I go to Glastonbury, but it's an easy mistake to make. So for the past decade, for the past 5 years and going into a decade, they've started looking at this archaeological archive. They started looking at the notes. They started looking at the plans, trying to put all this together. A team of 30 archaeologists putting all this information together. Boxes and boxes of finds that nobody has ever seen for decades. Plans and maps. You know, I've been into museums, and I remember a lot goes into producing an archaeological report. Believe me, a lot goes into one. And you've got boxes, you've got maps, you've got artifacts. And just think, if those boxes, artifacts are not published, then they're just boxes, artifacts, and that's all they are. So you've really got to be able to speak for that. So I'll be archaeologists. There were archaeologists that wished to. There were archaeologists that wished to make people feel that what they were finding was something to do with King Arthur. They wanted people to feel. Well, the point I'm trying to make is some archaeologists would excavate at the end of the 1800s, excavate at the beginning of the 1900s, and they would say, "Look, I'm not looking for King Arthur." And they would excavate, and they'd say, "Oh, actually, this is King Arthur's bones, or this is something to do with King Arthur." Instead of letting the archaeology speak, instead of saying, like, we've got walls, this is from the period of the 400s, we've got artifacts of this. Instead of what they were doing, they're taking that information and saying, this is the evidence for King Arthur, instead of just allowing people to interpret. There was an archaeologist known as Bly Bond. Everyone excavating in Glastonbury has got really interesting names, like Charles Hollingrake and sort of St. George Grey and Arthur Bullied. You know, there's wonderful names associated with Glastonbury and the excavations. Bly Bond, you could make it up. The Bly Bond was an architect, ecclesiastical architect. He became an archaeologist, and he was also a spiritualist. So when Bond was working in Glastonbury, he published some notes in a book, not a full archaeological report, but he published some notes in a book. Instead of taking the archaeology and saying, here's the archaeology, he took bits of the archaeology. He didn't publish it in full, as I said, took bits of the archaeology, and he said, actually, actually, I do believe that this archaeology is associated with King Arthur, because I've got psychic links with the ruins, and they tell me that King Arthur walked across these ruins and all the rest of it. What he should have done, he should have just published his results. He should have just given us the results, and then we could have made up our own minds whether they're to do with King Arthur or not. So there's a chap coming up now, and I'm going to share this on the screen. Rather colourful figure. I'm going to share this on the screen. Rather colourful figure. If anyone knows about King Arthur and the search for King Arthur in Tintagel, they will come across this name. Arthur Raleigh Radford. Again, wonderful, colourful name. Can you tell why I call myself KARL-JAMES Langford? Because I just want to be like these eminents. So his full name, Courtney Arthur Raleigh Radford. Now, he lived between 1900 and 1999. So he definitely, lots of archaeologists have good innings. There are several, like Findus Petrie, I think, lived till about 90 plus, 99 or something like that. Lots of archaeologists have great ages. So if you want to live a long time, become an archaeologist. But it does make you go a bit mad, and it does lose a lot of friends. So Raleigh Radford was excavating at Glastonbury. This is one of those that made something of his results, but he didn't publish his results in full. He excavated there in 1951, 1964. And he was highly respected for his ecclesiastical scholarship, and known for his particular focus on Celtic monasticism. Don't like the word Celtic, as you know. Raleigh Radford was attracted to sites also connected with the Arthurian legends of his native West Country. He excavated at Glastonbury, excavated in Tintagel. Now, I know some of you have been with me to Dinas Powys Hill Fort, which is hill fort constructed after the Iron Age, but we won't go into that. I may have mentioned Raleigh Radford, and I mentioned when we went to Dinas Powys, I mentioned when Raleigh Radford was excavating at Tintagel, he found trading objects which had been traded in the 400s and the 500s. He'd found trading amphora objects. He'd found trading amphora objects at Tintagel, and then the archaeologist working at Dinas Powys, Alcock, when he was excavating there, he found exactly the same stuff that Raleigh Radford was found at Tintagel, and all this evidence was in the 400s-500s. And then Raleigh Radford was actually excavating at Glastonbury. He found exactly the same evidence. So he found trading objects. He found there was glass being found, amphora, pottery, found at those three locations: Tintagel, Dinas Powys, and Glastonbury, all the same objects. And it proved that people were in Britain in the 400s and in the 500s, and they were trading extensively with the Mediterranean. And all that evidence was you could say, is from that period of King Arthur. So in fact, what they were finding these wonderful, very important sites, very luxurious sites with luxurious trade links, probably sites to do with local kings and stuff. They were finding all this information. But instead of saying this is what we've got, the links with King Arthur were exaggerated. And unfortunately, when in regards to Tintagel, the archaeological evidence that was being excavated by Raleigh Radford went up in, were actually stored at Bristol Museum and were destroyed in German bombing in the Second World War. So we can't check his results. Back to Raleigh Radford and Glastonbury, he conducted extensive excavations at the Abbey, and also carried out a search for the grave of Arthur Vere and Guinevere, guided by descriptions in medieval sources. In 1963, he announced to the press optimistically that he discovered the site of Arthur's grave, allegedly exhumed by the monks in 1191. Bad mistake! Why didn't he just show us what he had? I'll tell you what, some of that pottery from the 400s is really sexy stuff. The amphora is great. You know, a glass bowl that's come from Syria in the 500s is a wonderful piece of art. And actually, all that type of stuff is far more important to me than actually saying that you've actually found the burial site of King Arthur. So what they're actually showing there is another very famous archaeologist, Philip Ratz, and you've got obviously Raleigh Radford there. It's like that boys type of photograph. Look at the size of this; it's great, isn't it? And that photograph speaks more to me about sort of Glastonbury in 1966 than anything else. That's what brings it alive. So you've got this Philip Ratz guy and the excavator of the early monastic site at Glastonbury Tor. Now this is interesting as well. So what we'll do, we'll sort of move a little bit further on. So we've got this nice little image. Hang on, there. Look at that, lovely. So this Philip Ratz guy is actually excavating on the Tor itself. That's the Tor. The abbey's in front there in the foreground. They're excavating at the Tor. The Tor's slightly exaggerated there, but it's probably close to what we're thinking of. And if I go back to my notes, Philip Ratz is actually excavating at the Tor, not in the abbey area, actually on the Tor. So again, an archaeologist who was born in 1921, 2011, lived 90 years. The archaeologists are the types of careers you need to go into if you want to live a long time. And numerous other sites in and around Glastonbury, he was highly skeptical of using archaeology to investigate mythical characters such as Arthur. So he did it from a slightly different perspective than Raleigh Radford, describing the practice as historically misleading and trivia. Ratz was also critical of Raleigh Radford's emphasis on early Christian archaeology, arguing that it leads to an undue emphasis on the ideological, specifically Christian aspects of the period, influencing the choice of sites to be dug and the interpretation of the evidence recorded. And so when you think about Philip Ratz and you think of Raleigh Radford, you think of two archaeologists excavating in Glastonbury with two different ideas of how archaeology should be done. But I sort of come down between the two of them. You've got the archaeology, you get the period that the archaeology is from, and then people can look at that and they can make their own interpretations. If they want to feel it's to do with King Arthur, then they can do so. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a little plan. Show you a little plan, and looking at this, so we've got a nice little plan of some artifacts. And if we look at this building, this is believed to be sort of maybe a pre-Anglo-Saxon church at this area. So what they've got post holes, they've got little bits of archaeological evidence, they've got pottery, so you've got all that. And so what we're going to do, I'm going to read something out to you now from my notes. So this is really important. One of the key research questions surrounding Glastonbury Abbey is the date of the earliest settlement on the site. Very important. So forget about King Arthur now. Let's just go to let's go to the other stuff. So the monks of Glastonbury claimed that their old church, building like that, their old church, maybe their pre-Anglo-Saxon church, their old church, was the oldest in the land. And now that's quite a bold statement to make. I can make a statement as well. If you go to Caerwent, it looks like at Caerwent there's the remains of an early church at Caerwent, and that could probably date to the late 300s. So that's an early church. But they're saying that this church at Glastonbury is the oldest Christian church. It's a brushwood church at Glastonbury. It's a very early church. Yeah, how is this true? We know that the monks are prone to exaggerate. So they find the body of King Arthur in 1191. William of Malmesbury describes this early church in 1130. He suggests that it had been founded by missionaries, wait for it, in AD 166. So not only does that make it one of the earliest church in Britain, it makes it one of the earliest churches in the world. Now, this is his suggestion. Now, 1130, William of Malmesbury is closer to Jesus Christ than we are. We're basically 900 years away from him. But William of Malmesbury is closer. He's closer to the history than we are. Glastonbury is not really developed. And it's also said as well, that this is AD 166, this is way after, this is 100 years after Joseph of Arimathea. So people are saying that Joseph of Arimathea actually established an early church at Glastonbury. So going back to this, so what can the archaeology do to help us? And there was something that somebody spotted on Tuesday, actually. They said to me on Tuesday, they said, hang on a minute, you might have early buildings that predate the Anglo-Saxon stuff, but how do you know they're religious? And my answer was quite precise. Everyone was a Christian in Roman Britain by the 390s. So the ruins that you're looking at are Christian. They said, no, you're missing my point. The ruins actually the remains of a church. And I said, well, Christianity then acted very differently. So it's your interpretation. So I got out of it. So recent study of Glastonbury's Anglo-Saxon charters by a certain expert known as Susan Kelly suggests that the earliest monastic foundations were to be found in the 600s AD, which is years after the earlier dates that William of Malmesbury is saying. The medieval monks, though, it's believed they had descended from an earlier pre-Anglo-Saxon community. So she is saying before the 600s in Glastonbury, something was going on. It agrees Williams of Malmesbury. It sort of goes along with some of the archaeological evidence that was being found in the 1920s that we're only starting to learn about now. And this view was shared actually by Raleigh Radford. When Raleigh Radford was actually excavating, even though his own excavations recorded nothing earlier than from the 700s, he believed himself, he has to believe himself, that there's something much earlier at Glastonbury, and that would put it to the period of King Arthur, but away from King Arthur again. So reassessment of the archive and associated finds has revealed new evidence for earlier occupation at the site of Glastonbury Abbey. I'm going to show you an image from the 1920s of those archives that weren't massively made public. So where's that image? No, that's not there. Hang on. I may have to go to my text. Hang on. There. Bingo. Now that is actually, you've seen the other isometric pan earlier on. This is from the 1920s. This is the Anglo-Saxon church, but there's something below it. There's some other stuff below it that they're now actually starting to understand. And what is that stuff below it? That's what's exciting. That's what's exciting to me. So by reassessing everything, by reassessing the boxes and the archives and what's in those boxes wrongly labeled and so on, and actually to reassess the archaeology is a really interesting thing to do. And I'll give you an example of that. I'm drooling on about different things. A good example of that is that when the archaeologist John Story was excavating on Barry Island in the 1890s, and he was the same guy who was excavating at Lantwick Major on the Roman villa in 1886. So by the time he's working in Barry in the 1890s, he would say, look, I found Roman pottery, when in fact it was medieval pottery, or he'd find medieval pottery and it was Roman pottery, because back then they didn't have the dating techniques that we've got today. So it's what you need to do is look at an archaeological report, and you need to go back with the original artifacts, and you need to look at those artifacts, correlate them with the report, and then you can get the full picture. So among the most exciting discoveries made now from the boxes and the artifacts and the evidence that is found in the 1920s being looked at now was actually an assemblage of Roman amphora. Finding Roman amphora. So they found Roman amphora below these layers that you're looking at now. They found Roman amphora. This is really important. What is going on with that Roman amphora? Let's just show you a little image of that Roman amphora. There it is. Roman amphora handles there on the right. There it is. This is the area of excavation. This is where they're excavating, right? So amongst all that Anglo-Saxon stuff, yeah, there you go. You can see the chart there. There's a sort of cyan color. That's the Anglo-Saxon stuff, and you've got this sort of post-Roman stuff into the 400s. You've got this amphora, which is there on the right. So what you then got is that these sherds of pottery indicate the presence of amphora imported from the Eastern Mediterranean. Exactly what I was saying about Tintagel, exactly what I was saying about Dinas Paris, that would have contained wine and oil. And the similar evidence has come from sites such as Cadbury Castle as well. So they've got oil being imported into the late 300s, 400s. this community would have been Christian. That's it. That it was against the law to be any other religion. You had to be Christian. And so what they're then doing to look at the pottery and they're saying, actually, some of this pottery is actually quite later. It's about 450 odd. So exactly in the periods that we want to look at for a very fairly early church at the time of King Arthur. So they've got these 14 sherds altogether, and these sherds seemingly have then been broken up and then roughly trodden into the floor. Some of it's found in post pits. Some of that's associated with these post holes, those blue boxes on that they're big sort of post holes. Some associated with the cemetery. So this represents a floor layer. This represents pottery that's been broken. What would happen when after amphora was used? It would be broken up. That's what would happen. That's what they did in sort of the Roman world, the post-Roman world. They broke it up. It's good building material. You break it up. So that spread across the site. So sometime between that was spread across the site. Sometime into the 500s, you got this early timber hall, this early timber church being established. And then what they've got is looking at the post holes. They're finding that that the timbers in those post holes had been burnt. The building had been destroyed by about the 700s or the 800s. So that was when the hall was destroyed. So all we've got to do now is work out how long the hall had been standing. And it's believed that if the hall was burnt down in the late 700s, early 800s, they've got evidence to say that the hall was standing for about 300 years. So that puts it nicely into the period that we want to look at. It's a Christian hall. End of story. Whether it's a church, it's a Christian hall. That's the evidence. I'm bending the information a little bit. I'm making it a little bit biased, but I'm not making it biased. It's a Christian site, and it's from the period. If you're looking for King Arthur, so this important new evidence confirms that there was a high status occupation at Glastonbury in the 400-500s, relating to some of the stuff that I'm going to look at towards the end in connection with Philip Ratz's excavations at Glastonbury Tor. So, and this is long before the first monastic foundations were documented. So well before people are talking about King Arthur, well before they're talking about the early monastery, there's a building there. The archaeology tells us that there's a building there. Now, this is what's really important. So what we're talking about is that Philip Ratz is then excavating other localities at the site known as Beckery. The new evidence emerging from Glastonbury fits with the latest research at early monastery sites. So what's happening now is that we're really starting to understand this period. And the other point to be made just briefly here, and I think we'll have a little bit of a break in a few moments actually. The other point I'd like to make briefly here is you might be thinking to yourself, well, let's just go to these images. You might be thinking to yourself, well, why is it only now that people have actually been looking at this information? Why are they looking at it now? Why are they starting to find early Christian churches now? Why are they starting to sort of really understand these weird myths and legends associated with this post-Roman period? Why are they starting to do it now? They're starting to do it now because I think archaeologists are actually realizing that there's more information in boxes telling us stories than there is actually in the ground. And it's for example, I know Michelle's in the background doing some working on some artifacts from Trellick. And that's what the exciting stuff was. Michelle had found something in the artifacts, so she was trying to tell Mike, and there's me trying to teach. But anyway, Michelle's looking at this stuff. Now, if that had been put into a box, if that had simply been put into a box, nobody would know what that was. It's been excavated, but nobody would know what that was. So we're looking at that now, and we're getting lots of door studs and medieval door studs, and we get bits of medieval pottery, charred bone, and this and that, and all the rest of it. And it's by looking into these boxes and all this other information that you can actually learn new things and answers to questions that people have had for decades. If they hadn't looked at these boxes, if they looked at these boxes in the first place, they'd get the answers. But we're looking at these boxes now, and we're really understanding what's going on and getting those real answers to history and archaeology. And that's another reason why history and archaeology shouldn't be rushed. And you should take your time over it. But I've taken time over. I've got an archaeological report of a village that I excavated. I'm the only archaeologist to ever work at that village, and know the existence of that medieval village outside Cowbridge. And that work was completed in 1995, and I need to get into publishing that report so people can know about that site. So I'm a victim of the criticism I'm actually given now. So again, we've got this nice amphora here, and we've got the sort of layout, the sort of the Anglo-Saxon stuff, and these post holes. I know it looks rather strange shape, but if you can think of that as a hall, that would have been like this somehow. I know, but it's just that interpretation on the ground. And obviously, hang on, we will look at Glastonbury Tall after the break. And what we are going to do as well, we're going to mention Joseph of Arimathea, and we're going to look at the Lake Village. So I'm just going to go scroll through some of my notes to make sure I've done everything that I need to do there. And maybe what I might do is do a little bit of the Joseph of Arimathea stuff, and then we will take a well-required and a needed break. So we actually go back again. So instead of looking at the archaeology for a moment, I just want to give you some more information about this Joseph of Arimathea stuff and the tree that seemed to float all the way into from the Holy Land, and the Holy Tree. The Holy Tree managed to make it all the way into the Mediterranean and sort of went out into the Atlantic. And sort of went all the way up and eventually ended up in Glastonbury. But that's another story. Glastonbury archaeology, as we've said, is revealing lots of these early truths. So I think really by you whoever did it earlier on, about the art being found, I forgot what you bloody said it was. Oh, Indonesia, the art being found in Indonesia. So you're talking about the art being found in Indonesia, dating early art back 45,000 years. And this happens a lot where people are looking at archaeology and re-equating the dates of things. Now, the mistakes I love making, the mistakes I really love making is when I say something's like 400 years old and it's actually 500 years old. The mistakes I don't like making is when I say something's 400 years old and it's only 100 years old. I never make those mistakes. And if I do, I will hide it from you. It's good to make mistakes that are the other way around, because you've always got some room to give. You know, that's very, very important. So just a little bit of information here, and then what I would like to do is go on the break. So we'll finish with myth and legend before the break. So many Christians, we believe about Glastonbury being the earliest church. It's where Joseph of Arimathea went. According to the Gospels, Joseph was the man who donated his own tomb for the body of Christ following the crucifixion. By the 1300s, it was popularly believed that Glastonbury Abbey had been founded by the biblical figure of Joseph. When you use the word biblical, I'm not saying that's myth and legend. Let's sort of think of him as a real person for a moment. So the legend emerged that Joseph had traveled to Britain with the Grail, the vessel used to collect Christ's blood. For 800 years, Glastonbury has been associated with the romance of King Arthur, the Holy Grail, and Joseph of Arimathea and the Holy Tree. Later stories connected Glastonbury directly to the life of Jesus Christ. So listen to this one. And I've got to do this without a smirk on my face. I've got to do this as sort of giving you the information rather than dismissing it. In the 1800s, it was a popular West Country folk tale that claimed that Jesus Christ had visited Britain with his uncle, Joseph of Arimathea, in pursuit of the tin trade. And it may sound absolutely ridiculous, but where was Jesus for the 30 years of his life, where he seemingly disappeared, and for 3 years we know about him? I'm not saying there's any truth in this, but if you're people of faith, that you might believe this. And this thing about tin and all the rest of it, that's a thing, because we know that people from the Mediterranean are in pursuit of tin and so on. The myth that Jesus visited Glastonbury remains significant for many early Christians. Today, as is immortalized in the country's unofficial anthem, Sir Hubert Parry's hymn, Jerusalem, based on William Blake's 1804 poem, "And did those feet in ancient time walk upon England's mountains green? And was the holy Lamb of God on England's pleasant pastures seen?" Apparently that's based on Glastonbury, Jesus Christ, and that's the only singing you're going to get from me today.
Good.
No, I'm glad I had a bit of a, an acknowledgement there. Historical accounts describe an ancient church on the site in the 900s. And we talk again about William of Malmesbury, about the oldest of all those that I know of in England. Again, repeating that. But there's one point to be made here, rather interesting. William of Malmesbury's writing in 1130. Around the same date, you got Geoffrey of Monmouth writing in 1136. They're writing about all these different types of things with King Arthur and Glastonbury and so on. We go a few years on, in 1184, this really old church, whether it's the original Anglo-Saxon one or if it's the pre one, is probably the Anglo-Saxon one they're referring to. But there's an interesting point there. Interesting point, which I'll come on to. Whatever building was burnt down in 1184, within no time at all, Glastonbury, they're building a massive abbey. Something massive is being constructed there, right? 1191, Jesus Christ bodies found. In 1191, what we then find is that the monks reckon that they discover the bones of King Arthur. So you've got this devastating fire in 1184 of the old church. You've got the bones of King Arthur being found in 1191. And within no time at all, the massive, huge abbeys being constructed. Where's the money coming from? And this is a cynicism. Some people say that the monks find the bones of King Arthur because they want pilgrims going there. To be honest with you, having the oldest church in England, I think, would have been enough to get pilgrims there. But they needed a bit more, and they needed a bit more revenue. And we're going to put the money on the table. We're going to go to Glastonbury. We're going to find the body of King. All these different things are thought of, and they think that the bones of King Arthur were never found in 1191. But the archaeology tells us there's an early church there. The early church did exist. We know that's an archaeological fact. So the old church was the first structure to be rebuilt. A new chapel was erected on the site of the old church that had been destroyed by fire. The Lady Chapel that was consecrated in 1186 commemorates the old church and still stands today at Glastonbury Abbey. Any archaeological evidence for an early church would have been destroyed by the later construction of the crypt beneath the Lady Chapel. So all those different things, right? The fact of the matter is we've got all those references to an early church. We've got the archaeological evidence telling us about an early church. All this information is massively, massively important. And the thing is with all this is that there's talk as well that this church that was destroyed in 1184, if it was the Anglo-Saxon church or the early church, I say it's the Anglo-Saxon church from the 600-700s, not the very early church from the 400s. But they say that there's talk of the early church from the 400-500s being taken down and bits of it being used in the Anglo-Saxon church, the timbers being reused. So what was burnt down in late 1184 was an amalgam of the early church and the Anglo-Saxon church, and an amazing site. But it was burnt down in 1184. But we've got the archaeological evidence of it existing, the stone footings of the Anglo-Saxon site and the evidence of the earlier buildings. So that all comes into one. So what we're going to do now, I'm going to find out if there are any questions, and let's see if there are any questions. Right, let's go for it. So let's open the mics, and here we go. And I tell you what, right? Let's start with Ellen. Come on, make it brief, Ellen, because some of us have to blow our trumpets.
When was tin a top export?
When was tin the top export? The staple export, is that what you're asking?
Yeah, well, you know, in the olden days, when was it a very valuable thing that it
olden days
travel to get?
Well, the thing is, tin itself is still a very valuable product. But the fact of the matter is, what we're talking about is to have the bronze.
So I was talking to my daughter, and I said to her, "Oh, in the olden days," and she said, "You're talking about shouted at."
Right. Thank you. I'm trying to answer a question. Thank you. Very important question. So, in the olden days, right? Now Ellen's gone off. In the olden days, what we're talking about is to have the Bronze Age. To have the Bronze Age, you have to have tin. So, to tin, there's one other location in Britain that you've got tin, but there's not much of it. And in Cornwall itself, and with the tin, gave the explosion of the Bronze Age. So, in about 800 years BC, tin becomes massively important to create the Bronze Age in Britain. If that's the answer to your question. And then tin itself is said to have been used in Europe again at the same time. And lots of people are saying that tin is going over to Europe very, very early. So it could be quite possible that vessels are coming to Britain in the 500 years BC to Britain to collect that tin. So tin is massively important to the region. Does that answer your question, Ellen?
Yes, thank you.
Good. And so awful of you to interrupt then, Karen. Goff.
Yeah, I'm pretty cynical about this Arthurian legend, but the evidence you've given us, or the archaeology you've given us today, is very interesting. So I don't know if you're rooting for Arthur or not.
No. What I'm trying to do is exactly what you've got in your mind. You've got the evidence, and you can make up your own mind.
Okay, but getting back to Jesus and Joseph of Arimathea, he actually went to Barry Island.
And Lantwick too.
For a bag of chips.
And failed to convert them.
Oh, shut up. No, actually, the real fact is he introduced chips to Barry Island. He didn't go to Barry Island. He introduced chips to Barry Island. That's what you've got wrong, Goff.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you got that right, yeah? Good.
Yeah.
Got it.
Went to Michael's Island.
And you shut up about bloody Michael's Island. Right, Keith.
A silly question to start with. Glastonbury Tor itself, I've never been there, but presumably it's not man-made. It's a geological feature, even though it's heavily terraced.
Yes. Yes.
And the second thing, if they had found Arthur's body, maybe they would have found a big gold hoard with it, and that could have helped finance any abbey or anything like that.
Oh, how cynical. Yeah, that very, very true. But what I'm trying to say is that we've got evidence from the 400-500s, right? Whether you want to believe in King Arthur or not is up to you, right? I'm trying to put all the myths and legends in, but we've got the moment in time that King Arthur actually exists, because we've got the archaeological evidence for it, and you can work out, you can go your own direction there. Jim.
Yes, wouldn't it have been the Romans when they occupied Britain established the first Christian church?
That's what I say, and that's what I always say. Yes, because right. Let's just be clear on this one point, right? The Romans introduced Christianity; it's their legacy. It's British Christianity, and then you got Rome's Christianity in 597. You've got the re-establishment of Rome's control over the church in 597 in Britain, right? Now, but the church in Britain before that was that pseudo-cultist Christian religion that the Romans had introduced, which we've got lots of evidence for. So, Jane, quickly, Jane.
No questions. Thank you.
Jane Manolo. Oh, no, Chris Manolo. Oh, God, I'm getting this wrong. Chris Manolo. No, I'm not referring to you at all. Chris Fem.
Yeah, thank you.
So we got Pamela, and then we're gonna anything, Pam? No.
Yeah, it's really good. I've actually walked up the Tor. Only did it once. The church building you see on the top was apparently, this is what I've been told, the start of a church that was never finished. I don't know if you think that.
Philip Ratz will go on to that. You bring that in there. We're not doing that now. Philip Ratz, that's what we'll do at the end.
Who's Philip Ratz?
He's that archaeologist who excavated there, the 90-year-old archaeologist. I'm talking about 90.
So Carl,
Yeah.
what happened to the tomb?
It was dismantled, and like many things that were dismantled in the reign of Henry VIII, most of it ended up in the Tower of London. Like the crown jewels of the princes of Cymru, like some of the stuff stolen from the Scots.
So you reckon the tomb is in London?
It could, bits of the tomb could be in London. Henry VIII. The weird thing is about all this is if you read between the lines, Henry VIII had a chronicler deriving his chronology all the way back to King Arthur. So why would he destroy the tomb of his forefather? He would more likely bring the tomb to London. And anything you'd like to say, Karen?
No.
Right, you've had your telling off. I'm going to take a break now. I'm taking my break. 10 minutes. I've had enough of listening to Keith.
Thanks, Carl. So nice.
Right, Karen, I love you, really. You paid your dues, so I don't have to worry about insulting you.
I'm sorry, we forgot that we'd unmuted ourselves and we're carrying on our conversation.
Fine. I got to turn this off. When you cackle, oh my God, it's terrible. Okay.
Coffee break.
Good. So, yes, we can. Good. I'm just going to. Hey, Michelle, whilst why didn't you mention our little project to Mike?
What little project? And Jesus went to St. Michael's Island as well. Off of these.
We could do. I will take a note. Anyway, I'm gonna right, Mike. Go and chat to Michelle about a little project in West Wales.
What is the project?
The land.
Right. Yeah. We're looking to buy land for the West Wales Day. What?
No, not the Tower Mill, Michelle.
Oh no, not the mill. My God, that was it was frosty there. 12 o'clock in the day. It was on a north-facing slope. It was freezing there, and actually, as time went on, it was getting colder and colder in the afternoon, and you could see mist coming off the river. Can you imagine somebody up in there in Tyler? They couldn't have lived there for long. That's all I can say.
Michelle, I've had a massive load of inquiries about these books, but
yeah, so we're looking to buy land on the West Wales, but it's got some archaeological, like this one we're looking at. It's got hill fort on it. Apparently. But because of this lockdown thing, the estate agents asked if we, when we want to see it, and we haven't been able to go there. It's just under 3 acres, which is not big. It's potentially a little bit bigger than that, but say it might be a really good site. I haven't got a picture of it. But that's what we're going to do. So we're looking to buy land, some form of archaeology there, so we can use it like a business, you know. So we're doing like having some people there, only a couple of people at a time, but also do it online.
so you can hold the camera, Mike.
It's like Trellis now. Look, Stuart's got that like he does not follow it. That's a gold mine. Do live digging from there, you know, if people would love it. But he just doesn't know, I don't know.
Michelle, I think we're going to have to phone them to get another computer because this is all this.
Or you want me to go on this one and log in to your thing?
No, you need something like this. Mike, do make yourself bloody useful. Turn your phone off, and secondly, go and put the kettle on.
My phone's off.
about time Mike's
I
something.
never have bloody calls, and
And
I've
I
got
go-
2 people.
Yeah, I know you
today.
never have calls, ever. No, you don't, ever.
No.
You haven't brought any biscuits for ages. I'm really upset with you.
Yeah, because I've paid to come.
Oh, all right then. Switch my thumb Mike.
Camp.
Yeah, it's the one we're marching camp. That's my take on it.
So before the break, we were talking a little bit about Joseph of Arimathea. We did a lot about the archaeology. So looking at this plan again, so the archaeological evidence is shedding light on the questions of Glastonbury's origins, and I think that's really what I should be saying rather than King Arthur. But I shouldn't be ashamed of using the word King Arthur either, because the myths and legends are important to our identity and important to our history, and they shouldn't be dismissed. If you dismiss things, you dismiss history, which is something that I'm very much against. So the excavation records really confirm that you've got an early site located in front of us. We've got the imported amphora. We've also got some evidence of an early monastic cemetery. Whether that monastic cemetery is particularly just about monks' burials and so on isn't actually too sure there. What we've got, we've started all this work going on in the 1800s, 1900s, my hands moving around and all the rest of it. But what we've got is that the radiocarbon dating pinpoints the demolition of the timber, as I've already said, the demolition of that building, that sort of old timber building that was there, the demolition towards the late 700s, 800s, talking about that. And the radiocarbon dates us, helps that. It gives us an idea that the building's been there for about 300 years. Great. We've got that evidence, that broken amphora dating that layer below. So we've got this pre-Anglo-Saxon stage, we've got a pre-building, we've got something really important there. So this new archaeological evidence doesn't prove a connection with Joseph of Arimathea, doesn't prove a connection with King Arthur, it doesn't actually prove a connection with an early church. Is it a church, or is it just a Christian building? But it's definitely from the 400-500. So that's what we've got the evidence for. That's what's really important. And to have these trading objects coming from a long distance proves the importance of the site, the importance of Tintagel, the importance of Dinas Powys, the importance of Glastonbury and other localities like Cadbury, and so on and so on. And I mentioned just before the break about the fact that we might have this stone template, the stone template building built on the ruins of this earlier timber building that we're talking about. So this Anglo-Saxon church, sometime in about the sort of 800s, that's the sort of new building that's being built. And it's that idea that's brought to me in my notes. It says, this archaeologist uses the words curated the earlier timber remains within the Anglo-Saxon building because they were of special significance. So we've got lots of different ideas up in the air, juggling different ways of looking, but we've got an earlier significant site. The archaeologist uses the words, whether the earlier building is a special religious site, i.e. a church or something, or it's of ancestral significance to the monks. Now, that's a really interesting way of putting things. That's the archaeologist saying, actually, it's significant. It's ancestrally significant to the monks because they built their later church around that spot where you've got that timber building. That's sort of a little bit of a cop out there. So by about what some other little bits and pieces here. So we've mentioned Joseph of Arimathea. This early Christian church is pre the Church of Rome's mission in 597. So it's that next wave of Christianity replaces the early wave of Christianity, but it reveres the earlier timber building there. So what we do see is this analysis of what's going on at Glastonbury is very significant. There's a well-known writer, Geoffrey Ashe, and Geoffrey Ashe is an Arthurian expert. Anyone who knows anything about King Arthur, they will come across the word Geoffrey Ashe. And Geoffrey Ashe is somebody that Glastonbury is King Arthur, Tintagel is King Arthur, and you've got Blackett and Wilson who talk about King Arthur being in Brynner and Merthyr Mawr and all the rest of it. There's two schools of thought. The real King Arthur from South Wales, the real King Arthur being from Glastonbury. My King Arthur's come from all over the place because it's a popular name. You know, it means the bear. It means that a powerful figure. King Arthur is a name that was utilized by lots of leaders. That's what I believe. Even this expert, Geoffrey Ashe, who's very much into his King Arthur with Glastonbury, he says, to me, the most gratifying thing is the proof at last. This is an Arthurian expert talking about Glastonbury. So somebody who's believed in King Arthur there being all his life. Again, to me, the most gratifying thing is the proof at last that the original community was British and existed before the Saxons arrival, as I always maintained. So this is what Geoffrey Ashe is saying, this Arthurian expert. This is what he's saying. This is what I like to hear, actually. The foundation has now moved back 200 years to the period where it belongs. Brilliant. So whatever you want to believe, you got something extremely significant going on here, where it's almost as if the Arthurian experts and the archaeologists are coming together and actually sort of there's a bit of an intercourse of understanding, and everything's working. For the first time, Glastonbury's legendary traditions can be assessed alongside its archaeological evidence. That's coming from Reading University, not me. That's coming from a very eminent archaeological university. You saying that for the first time, Glastonbury's legendary traditions can be assessed alongside its archaeological evidence. Archaeology will not prove or disprove Glastonbury's legendary associations with King Arthur or Joseph of Arimathea. And I hope Goff is listening to this. But archaeology helps to explain what these myths meant to medieval people, how the story of Glastonbury has changed over time, and why it remains important spiritual beliefs today. And the one thing that I will say before we talk about the Glastonbury Lake Village and all that stuff, the one thing I will say is that we must not remove our connection with our myths and legends. They've got to be not powering us behind the archaeology, but a backdrop to the archaeology, because with those myths and legends makes the archaeology come alive, and that's very important. You can't have the invasion of Roman Britain without Emperor Claudius. You can't have it. You can't have the earlier invasions of Roman Britain without Julius Caesar. You can't look at the backdrop of Caraticus's coins and his resistance against the Romans without the name Caraticus. Whether these figures are massively myth or legend, they put meat on the bones of the archaeology. So I like to really look at a bit more of the archaeology now, just see if I've covered all the images that I wanted to cover at this stage. There was another image. We haven't looked at all these yet. So I think we'll sort of go through these quickly. So this is what we've been looking at: the myths and legends, the tomb of King Arthur, this earlier sort of plan from 1927. So the sort of vista in front where you've got the tour that we're going to be looking at, the area that we've looked at in front. There's our Philip Ratz, who we're looking at the end, his work at the tour. And we've the Anglo-Saxon stuff, and below that you've got the earlier church. And we're going to be looking here now. So this is the Glastonbury Lake Village. And that's what you see today. There's a Reen. This is what you'd be seeing occasionally when they reopen the excavations. This is from 2014. This is what the site looked like in the 1890s. Look at that. And this wonderful Glastonbury copper bowl. And again, far away from Joseph of Arimathea. So if we look at that now and we go down on that, and let's just look a little bit new information. I could give a whole talk on the Glastonbury Lake Village, which I'm not going to do, but I'll give you a little bit of information because that's what Glastonbury is also about. So the Glastonbury Lake Village was an Iron Age village situated on a man-made island. So whereas the tour behind me is a natural bit of rock, The Glastonbury Lake Village is north of Glastonbury, 3 miles north of Glastonbury. You can walk there. We actually walked from Glastonbury to the site of the village, and we were very disappointed because all it is fields now. The reconstructed building's gone and all the rest of it, but you can get an idea of a few humps and bumps in the landscape, and that makes up this sort of man-made island-like landscape, crannog-like landscape that composed one of 2 villages at Glastonbury, the Glastonbury Lake Village and the Mere Lake Village site. So you've got a wonderful, the best preserved prehistoric village ever found in the United Kingdom. The site covers an area 122 meters, football pitch size, by around 91 meters east to west. So it's a big area where you've got the remains of an Iron Age village. Now, we do know it was constructed 250 years BC. They used to believe, when they excavated it in the 1890s, that the site was probably constructed around 150 years BC, and it was abandoned around 50 years AD at the time of the Romans. So again, this is another demonstration by re-looking at the archaeological evidence in front of us. They managed to push the dates back 100 years. It's quite interesting that when they excavated this site at Glastonbury, they were able to get the dates within about 100 years. And this was, you know, this is 1890s. This is 60, 70 years before radiocarbon dating. So I think that's an absolutely massive achievement. And the platform that you can see in front of you had wooden houses, barns, probably a population of around 200 people. So you've got the wooden structure, and what they would have done, and the buildings would have lasted about 5-10 years, and then they would have collapsed, and they would have built more buildings. So it was a man-made landscape on a sort of reedy, boggy landscape, a natural man-made island, a huge crannog, as they say, the size of a football pitch. And it was originally excavated by Arthur Bullied in 1892. Now, I'm often critical of some of the old archaeologists. I am critical of Sir Mortimer Wheeler a lot in his early excavations in South Wales, and by the time he gets to Maiden Castle and lots of his other work, he's brilliant. I love Sir Mortimer Wheeler's work, but some of the earlier work is not what I would respect. And lots of other archaeologists I am critical of. But some archaeologists like Arthur Bullied, and you all know about the new film coming out in regards to Sutton Hoo, which is a beginning of a great film. There were archaeologists in the 1890s and through the early part of the 1900s that their archaeological work was absolutely brilliant. We wouldn't get the archaeology at Sutton Hoo if it wasn't done properly in 1938, 1939. Arthur Bullied excavating at Glastonbury, on the other hand, 1892, that's the archaeology that you see. The archaeology in front of us could show you loads of images, and you've got some wooden canoes in the tribunal building, actually in Glastonbury High Street. I don't know if it's used as a tourist information centre, but it's there. There's lots of other artifacts in Taunton. And the scourge of archaeology, as Michelle would say it, lots of the archaeology ended up in the British Museum, some of the more unique stuff. But lots of the stuff in Glastonbury is still there. Lots of the archaeology of the Lake Museum, lots of the archaeology of the Lake Village is actually still under the surface, but it's gradually decaying. They're occasionally excavating there, and they're looking at how the archaeology is surviving and how it's deteriorating, and so on and so on. So, excavating there when Arthur Bullied was actually excavating at the site in 1892. A medical student doing archaeology, great, but he took his inspiration from looking at lake villages in Switzerland where you would go to on holiday, and in 1892 he's excavating there. So he's using his scientific medical knowledge to excavate an archaeological site. So a scientist working on an archaeological site rather than an architect is a lot better thing. And he's excavating there. He's excavating there, and the work's handed over to another archaeologist called Arthur St. George Graves, who's a name that might come up in anyone reading about archaeology. So there's this continuous excavation from the 1892 to 1907, and they're finding a number of buildings, over 50 odd houses that they found, 50 odd houses, and the type of evidence that they get is very, very well preserved. Again, you've got 2 sites, the Mere and the Glastonbury Lake Village site, and the types of artifacts found, just a little bit of a list, and then we'll do a little bit from current archaeology about this. that finding lots of pottery on the site, this wonderful Iron Age site, sort of from whetstones to weaving combs, to evidence of bronze casting and iron smelting, and the wonderful bronze bowl that we'll have a wonderful copper bowl that we'll be looking at, and even a tin coin. Ellen mentioning coins, so a very sort of early coin was actually found at the site as well, a tin coin, a native coin, and the Glastonbury bowl as well, which we'll have a little look at, and I'll just show you that as I'm reading this from my notes. So the Glastonbury bowl. So this bowl itself, it says a bronze bowl. It's just, the copper content looks a lot more higher there, but I'll bow to this one. A bronze bowl, Glastonbury bowl, was made from 2 sections riveted together and repaired several times over its life. This wonderful bowl in the Bronze Age. There's a point to be made there. Lots of the most finest bronze stuff is actually created in the Iron Age, not in the Bronze Age. So there you go. So finding lots of wooden objects as well, including several boats, and in fact, a hub associated with somebody constructing a wheel. Lots of woven baskets found at the site. They had the reconstruction Pete Moore's Centre, which finally closed in 2009. I'm just wondering if I'm just wondering if there's anything left of the building. It's probably burnt down by now. I don't know, but they had this wonderful reconstructed village building there, and it's gone, which is a big shame. I love those types of sites. And evidence of wooden objects, wooden frames for stretching animal skins, and sort of dice and various other bits and pieces that they actually found. So what I've got is a little bit of information here as well, which might be helpful in understanding this site. So again, looking at that bowl and sort of going back again, that wonderful platform. You can see the old sort of horse and trap in the distance. A gentlemanly medical expert, and what he did to preserve the site, Arthur Bullied and St. George Grey, when they'd finished the excavations by 1907, they actually immediately covered the site back with the original peat that had come off it. And surprisingly enough, the site is in still quite good preservation, even though the landscape is being drained with these reams on a regular basis. So if we're sort of looking at that image, some of the archaeology is still in a relatively good state by about 2014, but lots of areas of this site, the archaeology is completely dissolved away. Just sort of giving you a little bit of more information about this. So what they've done in more recent days, they've gone back to the site and they've started looking for radiocarbon evidence. And it's allowed them to be a bit more precise on when the buildings were constructed. They put the dates back by about 100 years. Between about 40 or 50 roundhouses, as I said, and associated and enclosed working areas, sort of this wonderful platform. They originally thought that the site dated from roughly around 100 years BC to about 50 years AD. But what they've done by looking at the evidence, they pushed the radiocarbon dates back a whole 100 years to about 250 years BC, and the site was abandoned probably around 50 years before the birth of Christ. So things have massively changed. So what they've been doing is they occasionally go back to the site. There's occasional excavations at the site to see how the preservation of timbers are doing. Unfortunately, every time you do that, you add bacterium to the soil. So you've got to be very careful what they excavate. It's a large area, and actually a whole acre, sort of whole sort of football pitch of land, about an acre. So what they're doing is obviously the site was deliberately reburied, which was great. This wasn't an archaeologist who said, right, what we're going to do, we're going to leave the archaeology out forever, to see forever, and then in 20 years time it's all gone. So we decided sensibly to cover it all up, and they're starting to get a really good idea of what's going on. And another interesting little fact here is the samples of the radiocarbon dating across this wonderful site were taken from structures that are thought to reflect different rebuilding episodes, totaling 65 from 15 different buildings. So 65 different phases of building at the site. 65 So rebuilding phases at the 65 different rebuilding phases over a period of about 200 years. So in other words, they're rebuilding their buildings every few years because they're getting damp and they're rotting, and they just stick another one up. It's a nightmare to sort of get all those dates. It really, really is. And it's actually saying that the site probably was probably used for about 160 years and no more than that. Overall, the settlement appears to have grown quickly, with a population of around 200 people, with a relatively short lifespan of about 160 years with lots of phases. And the combination of waterlogged conditions and substantial wooden structures meant that most roundhouses built on the site probably did not last more than 10 years before having to be rebuilt. So in some areas you got phases quite rapidly within every few years. So what I'd like to do now is just finally go on to the tour itself. So we'll just go through some images and just sort of, so this is the more modern work that they've been doing, the ream that you'd see. I got to be honest with you, it's a really strange landscape. You go there, you drive out there, it's marked on the map, you drive out there and it's just these reams from the road. It's a very strange landscape. Sort of in the distance, you can see some humps and bumps. And this is not relevant what I'm going to say, but I'm going to say it. It always reminds me of the conditions that would have been fought at the Battle of Sedgemoor, which isn't too far away. When you're looking at like a boggy, horrible landscape like this, and it's got that eeriness. I've been to the Battle of Sedgemoor as well, and it's very similar to this. And you're looking at thinking, why would you want to live in this landscape? It's very strange. People did live in this landscape in the Iron Age, and they tamed the landscape and they built these platforms and the buildings, but having to rebuild buildings every few years, it would be a nightmare. But that's what they did. But they had the resources, they had the timber, and this is what the archaeology tells us. So away from this, going away from these buildings that we've seen and on to the tour, looking up at the tour. The tour is the type of place to go if you've got if you've got asthma. Make sure you take your asthma pump, a really nice bottle of water, and sit at the top. And what really annoyed Michelle the last time up there when I was blowing my trumpet and had a group of people around them wanting me to play the trumpet. Can I give you another little weird fact, Keith? Right, when we went to Glastonbury, I had my trumpet with me last year, and the manager of the shop pulled me over. He said, "How often do you play that trumpet? The bugle, my bugle?" And he said, "Will you play it for me inside the store?" And it was really strange. And he said, "Will you come back and sort of play your bugle outside the shop so we can raise some money for local charity?" Isn't that right, Michelle? Yes, she was there. And she still didn't believe it. She walked out. And then I texted him back. I said, "Were you serious about this?" He said, "Yeah, I was." Anyway, so
you have a career as a busker, obviously.
A career of driving people away from shops, yeah. So Glastonbury tour overlooking sort of this is how this church looked like the Anglo-Saxon church before the Normans got there, and then that's that part of the building, and then you've got these other the other stone buildings that actually exist today, which were replaced by the Normans. Glastonbury tour, so much written about it, and so many different ways of looking at this. I'm just fleeting through this, and I'll go to the plan. This lovely little bronze little mast that was actually found in there, this little head there, nice little strange object. And this is what they feel was going on at the top of the tour, where you've got these other buildings that were being excavated by other archaeologists and Philip Ratz. So you've got these nice little buildings all on the top now. You've got that St. Michael's Tower, that wonderful St. Michael's Tower. Interestingly enough, the area that they've excavated is only from the back here. So this is north, this is south, and this little area here, this is where the buildings are. So if you go back to sort of that's what you're talking about. So only a small area on the top that they've got buildings and they've excavated. So if we go to, again, we will mention that. It's really interesting bronze head. It looks very Sutton Hoo-ish, actually. I've seen the Sutton Hoo mast. That's what it looks like to me. St. Michael's Tower, and there it is, and there's the little plan, St. Michael's Church, St. Michael's Tower. So that bit of the tower is what's left there today. And what I'm going to do, I've got a nice little bit of text that I'm going to read out for you all. So that's where we're going to go now. Let's sort of go into this. So here we go. So I'm going to finish where I began. Archaeology, myths and legends, and then you can make up your own mind. So Glastonbury tour, strangely enough, with a little bit of a smirk on my face. Glastonbury tour, there's a legend associated with Caradog of Llancarvan, which is written down, Llancarvan's life of Saint Gildas, story about Caradog, and then you've got a link with Caradog, Guinevere, King Arthur, Saint Gildas, King Melwas, and Glastonbury tour. And he said in this life that's written down, this vitae that's written down in 1130, that Melwas, a local king at Glastonbury, sometime in the 400-500s, I'm putting those dates in there, kidnapped Guinevere. And King Arthur besieged this site, this locality, where you look at that plan, besieged this area, and basically, however, Gildas, ever the peacemaker, persuaded Melwas, king of Avalon, to release Guinevere, and the two monarchs soon reconciled their differences. And you're thinking that, and you're thinking, right, okay, there's a Welsh poem, the dialogue of Melwas and Guinevere, and that the surviving manuscript dates to the 1500s. And it talks about, there's two sources. You've got in Caradog of Llancarvan's life of Gildas, the vitae, from 1130. You've got this Welsh poem that might be from the 900s, 1000s, but it's a copy from the 1500s. And it's talking about two kings. It's talking about Arthur and it's talking about Melwas. And you're thinking, well, that's rather interesting. That ties in with me as an archaeologist. Because if you're thinking about a king at Avalon, the king at Glastonbury, you're talking about a king at Tintagel, and you're talking about this sort of intercourse with that type of landscape, the things are breaking down in 400-500s, right? With the archaeology, it fits in quite nicely. Is it the same king, Arthur? Could be anybody. So the modern archaeology itself, the excavations on Glastonbury tour, undertaken 64 and 66 by the Philip Rats, as I mentioned, revealed evidence of early medieval occupation. And the site was entered via roughly cut steps. So on the left-hand side there, you can see these little cut steps. Can you see them? Good. Hopefully you can. So it's this very small area, as I've said. It's a big area when you're there, but it's a small area. You can't put many buildings there. And interestingly enough, I know Chris was with me, and a few of you were with me when we went to Dinas Powys. Dinas Powys is quite a small area, isn't it? Where the early medieval stuff is going on, which is contemporary with this. Very small area. And actually the area fortified at Tintagel is a very small area. So people living at this time are within small sort of hilltop areas with defenses and whatever. So similarities. And as he excavated, lots of evidence of post holes. We've got various structures that you can actually see on your plan. You can see this sort of interesting structure on the right there, this sort of wall-like structure there. And it's talking about hearths. And there's a furnace there. You can see a little bottle-like thing. That's a bit of a furnace there, a little red thing. And it's talking about also, there's evidence of bellows being used at the furnace, that sort of little red thing that looks like a little jar. And you've got a little building that's not on the plan there, but it should be actually marked. There's a little latrine, and there's a little thing marked there, cairn as well. And the cairn was actually found to be empty, but it was actually full of animal bones and actually medieval amphora. Actually, no, say that again. Use my wrong word. Mediterranean amphora from the 500s. It's the same evidence found here. Is exactly the same evidence found at Dinas Powys and Tintagel, and probably lots of other sites. So people are bringing amphora to this site, and it's part of that rich period. So it's not the Dark Ages in the 400s, 500s, 600s. It's illumination. The archaeology is illuminating the landscape. It's telling us of that intercourse and trade and tin and everything with the Mediterranean. I haven't mentioned the A word there as well, simply because this sounds really sexy stuff. It really, really does. And you've got evidence of bronze buckets and various other things as well. So finally, my notes are actually bringing probably this all together. Actually, really is. So the possible interpretation of what Philip Ratz is actually excavating on top of the Tor, the traditional religious nature of the Tor's summit, shown today by the surviving Tower of St. Michael's, might suggest that that is a tiny bit of what was once there. This is a lot more than just a tower. This is a lot more than, as I opened today, as a place that the abbot was actually hung. Is this a monastery? Is this a site of a king? Is this a site of both? This site itself is basically they talk about Malwas, and they talk about it's going here. The church dedication might in fact indicate a pagan religious site there, later converted to Christianity, as most of these sites did, associated with St. Michael. Thus, the devil was conquered by St. Michael, St. Michael's Mount, St. Michael's Tower, all that type of stuff. Evidence of this little bronze mask, and they say that that might actually be from a bishop's crozier, an early bishop's crozier, which is a staff. There's links. It's said as well in another source written down, so we can't really trust this, but we'll say it anyway. St. Patrick is said to have discovered an abandoned hermitage here in the 400s. So if there's, you see there, you've got sort of why is St. Patrick finding an abandoned hermitage here in the 400s? And it's all this stuff, all these little things that lead to the archaeological evidence being really, really interesting. That's dubious, a dubious interpretation. But again, it's an interpretation nevertheless. Graves being found there. Are these to be seen in a Christian context or an earlier context? This could be the site of the capital of this king that we've mentioned earlier on, Melwas. Melwas being ruler in the summer country. If this is fact or fiction, it brings us to understand this very great landscape, this very interesting landscape of Glastonbury. And this tour, you can see where, you know, the ruler over the summer country, this tour would have dominated over the country and agricultural fields. But in the winter, this tour itself is surrounded by water. So what I would like to do is finally sort of look at these images briefly again. So you've got the steps, the top of the tour, you've got this little furnace, you've got all these little buildings on the top. A lot more to see than just the tower, which is behind me, Glastonbury tour. And I've gone away from the myths and legends at the end, put a bit of myth and legend in, but I've looked more at the archaeology. I've seen that the archaeology is telling us a lot more than the myths and legends do. And so the buildings that we've actually just seen give this type of reconstruction, which is a more powerful image than myths and legends can ever give us. It's actually archaeology. It's footprints. It's things that have been touched by people that are real. And as you look down at the landscape of Glastonbury now, bringing the sense of those myths and legends, looking down on Glastonbury Tor, looking on something very powerful. And I'd like to leave this, whether you want to believe myths or legends, the archaeology speaks volumes, because the archaeology is the evidence, is what really happened. But in many ways, the myths and legends should never be discounted, because that gives us our identity, that gives us our beliefs. And at that moment, I'm going to end. So are there any questions? Goff?
No questions. Very interesting. Thank you very much.
My pleasure, always. Keith?
That looks very terraced, doesn't it, that hill? So do we know when that was done?
Well,
it looks like Maiden Castle-ish.
Well, actually, you know what? Because of the erosion, because of this being a natural outcrop, there's been lots of talk about this. If you go into some shops, it'll say that this is a labyrinth, right? This is a labyrinthal type of mound. But in many ways, it's the way things have formed over time.
Oh,
What
right,
happens? You've got soil creep, and those are creating lynchets.
Right.
And as the soil goes down, they go in levels. There's
Yeah.
lots of different ways of looking at it, but don't think of this as a defensive site. Think of this as a site of both man and nature working together.
Oh, good. Yeah. I mean, I've never been there, but it looks like I'll have to try and get there soon. As soon as we're released.
Yes, there are things in the offing. Right, Chris, female for once, because she does need to speak out.
Two things really. The flooded village, is that contemporary with the place that they found in Cambridgeshire recently?
It's no.
No.
Because,
I couldn't remember the dates.
Actually, weirdly enough, talking off the top of my head here, the stuff at Peterborough Must Farm, which dates to 3,000 years ago, this stuff dates to 2,100 years ago.
Yeah.
So there's a difference of 900 years. And the stuff at Must Farm with the roundhouses is built in a completely different way, completely different style. The buildings at Must Farm were a lot better built than these, probably different timber, probably better building material than is available. So that's the difference. It's a completely different time span. The stuff at Must Farm is as well preserved as this, better preserved from a different perspective.
Yeah. Okay.
Must Farm was a moment in time that was lost. Glastonbury was a moment in time over a long period of time rebuilding. So it's a bit of a mismatch.
Okay. There's another thing, which I've forgotten. It's gone now.
Well, I know I look forward to if you want to tell me that. It's fine.
The graves on top of the tor.
Yeah.
Did they find any skeletons or bones?
Yeah.
And have they tested them to find out? Because there's obviously the legend is that he's buried. You know, King Arthur's buried on the top of the tor.
Oh no, please!
So have they actually found when those skeletons date from?
They date from this period that we're talking about, an early cemetery in the description of an early medieval cemetery. So it comes from around this time. I haven't got any more information than that.
Okay, thank you.
So right, let's get through these questions quickly. Male Chris.
No questions. No, very interesting. Nice
lecture. Okay, you quick, Pam, because I know you go on a bit. By the way, anyone joining Jessica's class tonight, stay behind at the end. Okay, anyone joining Jessica's class tonight at 7 o'clock, stay behind at the end. Right, Pam, quick, go.
I haven't got anything.
All right, that makes a change.
No, I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you. What about you, Ellen? Same with you, Elle? I called her Elle. She's going to bite my neck off for calling her Elle. God.
She's muted.
Oh, good.
Two tiny things. One, just by coincidence, I did turn on Facebook. Are you linked with archaeology in Britain?
No, not that. No, we're not.
Via that, one of the people that puts lots of messages out has put a thing out for historical metallurgy.
All right.
They've just done a big project on Cornish and Devon tin.
All right. Well,
in the olden days. And then the other thing is, I turned it on to confirm about the four-legged tripod.
Ah, right, yeah.
And then the answer was yes. The designer took inspiration from H.G. Wells's books and amalgamated several of his descriptions into one machine. So technically, it isn't a specific tripod; it's a mashup of several things. And there's a four-legged one, as described in one of his books, but everybody has jumped on it and said it's a four-legged tripod.
Yeah, my head's going now.
So it does seem that there was a four-legged machine in one of his
books. Oh, come on! Flipping heck, it's three-legged.
Have it in writing.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's fine. I appreciate you doing that research. So obviously, if somebody says, I can say, oh, actually, there was a four, and ask. Yeah. So, right, okay. So we've more or less done everyone. What about Jim? Jim Babes?
He's muted.
No, I'm okay. I'm muted. No, nothing really. It was fascinating. I like to believe in King Arthur.
Why not? Why not? There you go. And then quickly, Karen, straight down to your undies, and let's see from you. Do you want to say anything? What about you, Andrea? They don't want to say
Karen's
anything?
muted.
All right, then they don't want to say anything. It makes a change. They're really gobby usually. So I did ask them to unmute, and they don't want to talk to us. So if there's no other questions, right? if there's no other questions, I really appreciate you being with us today. As I say, if anyone wants to talk about tonight, then stay behind at the end. But if not, thank you very much. Looking forward to next week, the Benin bronzes, and well, I'm gonna move that into something else as well. Because we're going to be looking at settlement and we're looking at the archaeology. We're not just going to be looking at the bronzes per se, something that we did in university a few years ago. So if there's nothing else anyone likes to say, they can stay behind and have a chat. I'm going to say goodbye to Ellen, Keith, Chris, Pam, Jim, Chris, Aaron, Ralph, and Jane.
Bye, everybody. Bye, Daddy. Bye,
everyone.
Bye,
Girls, hermaphrodites.
Did you want us to stay on if we're listening to Jess tonight?
Yeah, that's the one. That's the one.
Okay, you're not.
Well, yeah, all right then. Chris is obvious. Right, so you're joining us tonight at 7 o'clock, yeah, Ellen, because you paid for it anyway.
Yeah.
All right, then, that's it. So, yeah, so that's it, really. That's all I wanted to say.
Oh, right.
So, yeah, so that's it. So, I'm glad you got the video from last night. Yeah, what happened, right? As soon as we switched off, I looked at the screen and I realised you'd come on, but it's too late to go back on. But we just...
No, I tried last night loads of times and I just wouldn't go through again. So, anyway.
We did start at 7 last night, so yeah. I don't...
Right, okay.
No, don't worry, it's fine. So that worked quite well today, actually. It was really quick, worked good. It did. I like that today. It was good. Anyway, see you.
All the best.
All the best. I'll sign on tonight anyway and say hello, and we'll go from there.
All right. Cheers. Bye.
Take care, Ellen. Bye. Bye-bye.
Love to Michelle.
Oh, Michelle's in the background. Love to Michelle. Good, she's gone. Okay. So, anyway, thanks for watching. It's going okay. Seeing as I've still got the COVID thing. So please link and subscribe, and thanks for watching today. So I'm going to call it a day and stop that screen sharing. Any questions, put them down below. Any PayPal support, just let me know. Thank you very much.